Okay, so I'll go ahead and start by introducing myself. My name is Allie Webb. I'm a yoga therapist here at Zoe Therapy Services, and I wanted to share with you some sample practices and kind of give a brief outline of what our body-focused healing for anxiety yoga therapy group looks like and what it is. And so if that's something that is interesting to you and sounds like something you would want to participate in, hopefully all your questions will be answered. And if not, hopefully you'll just leave after this next hour or so with a few tools that you can use on your own, some practices, and if nothing else, just feel better for this afternoon. So I'm glad that y'all are all here. And again, jump in with any questions anytime you'd like. So I'm going to start. I have a little slide presentation that hopefully will answer a lot of questions. And then we'll go from there, answering any specific questions you have. And then we'll go into some practices. Okay, so this is, again, body focused healing for anxiety. It's an 8-week yoga therapy group. And I'm going to, we'll talk about what that means exactly and how that's different than a yoga class. So first, what is yoga and how can it help with anxiety? Well, yoga means union, and so it's the union of mind and body and spirit. And so it takes into account the physical body, the mental body, the emotional body, the spiritual body, all of these different layers that we have to what makes us who we are, what makes us human. We can't really separate just the physical or just the mental or just the emotional out. We really have to address them all at the same time. And so yoga does that. And when we think in terms of anxiety, it's a cycle of thought, which we'll talk about a little bit today, and we go into a lot in the group. Anxiety is a cycle that begins in the mind as a thought. We feel the sense of an alarm in the body. We feel some physical sensations of discomfort in the body as a result of those thoughts that are fearful in some way. And then that cycle continues. The fear or the alarm in the body kind of confirms that the thought must be true in the mind. And then we feel it even more intensely in the body, which then confirms it more in the mind. And so it's this cycle that has to do with our physical body and our nervous system and the thoughts that we're having. And we can't just address the thoughts. We have to also address it in our body. And so when we can separate the mind and the body a little bit, then we can start to heal the anxiety and see what it's really trying to tell us. And that's what we do in this yoga therapy group. So here's just a little chart I made that explains the difference between a yoga class, which some of y'all may be familiar with, and a yoga therapy group or session. And so specifically in a yoga class, it's based primarily on instruction in yoga techniques. It's more of a general practice. It's a general application of the tools and practices of yoga. So there might be some movement, there's some breath work, there may be some meditation, but it's usually a little bit more physically focused. Not necessarily fitness focused, but oftentimes it is. But it really addresses the physical body for the most part. A little bit of emphasis and, well, hopefully a lot of emphasis on breath work, maybe a little bit of emphasis on meditation, but doesn't really get into the therapeutic applications of these things. It just, it's more of a group setting, a little bit more general, a little bit more physically focused. It's often a community practice like a class, and it's led by a teacher. And there may be some options and adaptations given for individuals, but it's not really taking into account specific situations that the participants might have. Yoga therapy is the therapeutic application of the tools and practices of yoga. As far as the level of experience and training that a yoga therapist has compared to a yoga teacher, in most cases, yoga teachers have about 200 hours of training under their belt before they start teaching yoga classes. Some will go on to get another 300 for 500 hours of teacher training. And so there's a 200-hour level and a 500-hour level teacher trainings for yoga teachers. Yoga therapists do another 800 hours over the 200. So it's 1,000 hours altogether. About 150 to 200 of that is work with clients, supervised, mentored clinical practicum hours. And so it's a significant difference in the level of training and education and practicum. And the purpose of that is to really address specific conditions. So it can help with anxiety, with depression, with lots of mental health conditions, post-traumatic stress, chronic health conditions, things like heart disease, diabetes, cancer care, all sorts of things like that. So it's the therapeutic applications of these tools and practices. And it's not necessarily focused on physical movement. So in this yoga therapy group setting, we don't do a lot of poses, at least not that we would recognize as yoga poses. We use the body for sure. We do some movement, but it's not necessarily going to look like a yoga class. There's not a lot of warrior poses and downward dogs. It's more, again, the therapeutic application of all these different tools that we can use, not just the physical part. Again, it addresses all the physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual levels of the body. It can be individual or in small groups. In this case, we're talking about small groups. I do work one-on-one with individuals as well. And a yoga class is generally led by the teacher, and everybody just follows along with what the teacher says to do. In terms of yoga therapy, it's really teaching the client to be empowered towards their own self-healing. So it's teaching these tools so that then you have access to them anytime. They become your own personal resources, your own toolbox of things to use in the moment, and also things to use long-term toward ultimately getting to the point of, if we can even say, healing from anxiety, as opposed to just managing anxiety. If we really can get to the root of what the anxiety, when and where and how it began, and how do we move forward with it, what it's trying to tell us today, and how we can learn to create new patterns and new pathways in the brain to hopefully not really have it so much anymore. And when we do have it, know how to manage it. So yoga, if this may or may not be new to some of y'all, but there are what we call 8 limbs of yoga, and there's all of these different parts of yoga. And if you look down here, asana, or the physical postures, is just one of the 8 limbs. In yoga therapy, we do a little bit of movement. We definitely use the body, but for the most part, yoga therapy is focused on the other 7 limbs. The yamas are, it's kind of universal morality. It's how we treat other people. And it's things like being truthful and not stealing and not harming others and things like that. The niyamas are personal observances. These are things like self-study and discipline, purity, taking care of ourselves. So this is kind of how we become our best version of ourselves. Asana, again, is physical postures. Pranayama is breath practice. We use a lot of different breath practices in this yoga therapy group. Pratyahara is the withdrawal of the senses. And so this is how we can learn that life can be crazy and chaotic all around us. People can behave however they're going to choose to behave. And we can still find a sense of inner peace within ourselves, that we can manage ourselves. We can stay calm. We can stay at least some level of peacefulness within ourselves so that we can respond accordingly to situations and we don't feel super reactive, and we're not as affected by our external circumstances. So that's that practice. Dharana is concentration and dhyana is meditation, and these kind of go together. They're similar. But if we know, we may have experienced, if we have anxiety or a lot of chronic stress, it's hard to concentrate. And so this is a practice where, again, we get our bodies and our brains and our nervous system into a calm place so that we are better able to concentrate and therefore move forward with whatever big things we have going on in our life. Again, meditation is a big part of the practice, and ultimately we're working toward absolute bliss. We may not get there in 8 weeks, but that's always the goal we're working toward. And that's the 8th limb of yoga. And that's just a kind of a connection to something greater than ourselves, a sense of purpose, a sense of contentment and peace, regardless of our circumstances, is what samadhi kind of is encompassed by. So that's just a little yoga education there, yoga philosophy. In yoga therapy, and particularly in this 8-week group for working with and managing anxiety, we start with awareness. So first we notice our patterns. We recognize the feelings and emotions that we have and what we feel in our body and how it feels. We start to define it. And instead of pushing it away and resisting it and trying to avoid it, we really allow it in, to become aware of what we're experiencing so that then we can decide how we want to move forward. There's a significant education component to this, because I strongly believe that the more you know, the better you can work towards your own healing. There's so much power in knowledge. And so we learn a lot about the nervous system. We learn about the polyvagal theory, which has to do with regulating the nervous system and feeling safe in our bodies. And I'll go through the outline in a little while, and we'll talk about a lot of the other education components of it. We do some self-discovery. So we have some quizzes and some assessments, and we learn about ourselves and the patterns that we might have, so that, again, we can decide what we want to do with those, if we like those patterns and behaviors, or if we want to change them. We do practice every week. We don't necessarily have to roll out a yoga mat to do that, but we start to incorporate these practices in our sessions. And then you always have home practice to do. The idea is that you start to use these in your everyday life, integrating them into whatever you're doing, whenever you're doing. So you start to know which tool works best for you in which situation. A lot of these tools only take a couple of minutes at a time to do, and we don't need a whole hour-long yoga class. Um, but we want to just develop the pattern and the habit so that we know exactly what to do without um, maybe even getting to that point of feeling overwhelmed, because we're just kind of managing ahead of time. It's ultimately the goal. So let's talk just for a minute about anxiety. And anxiety, as I said, is this cycle of thoughts and feelings in the body. So we start, well, who knows where it starts, right? But it's a continuing cycle. But let's say we start with anxious thoughts about the future. Anxiety is future focused. There's definitely some effects from the past that inform this anxiety, but it's always, anxiety is forward focused. So it's thinking about, worrying about, concerned about something happening or something not happening the way it's supposed to in the future. And when we believe the anxious thoughts that we're having, our body gets scared. And when our body gets scared, it moves into its fight or flight response. So when the body senses our fear, it goes into that sympathetic stress response, which then triggers the feelings of fear and alarm in our body, which then confirms the thoughts in our head must be true. And then that cycle just continues until we break it. So it's a mind-based thinking of projections, expectations, stories, and thoughts about the future. We talk about the nervous system a lot in this group because ultimately our goal with all of these tools is to rebalance the nervous system. We want to bring the body out of a state of chronic stress that it probably tends to live in most of the time if we are experiencing anxiety. And we want to teach the nervous system that where it's supposed to stay is down here, and the rest and repair and digest parasympathetic nervous system response, so that when something happens and we need to respond to it appropriately, we can activate the stress response. And then when that event is over, we can come back down. When we are living with chronic stress, we are constantly up in this sympathetic nervous system response, which is our fight or flight response. That's our body's automatic response to threat. And when we're in that nervous system response, the logical part of our brain, the executive prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning part of our brain, is not, it's not functioning. It's really turned off during that. And the amygdala and the fear center part of the brain, which is the more primitive part of the brain, is driving the bus. And so we need to calm down the amygdala, calm down the alarm system in the brain so that we can follow through on goals that we have, make behavioral changes that we want to have. When we know what to do, but we just can't seem to get it done, that's what's happening here. And so when we can calm the nervous system down, then all of a sudden, when we know what to do, we can actually act on that more appropriately. So some of the things that happen when we're in fight or flight is that our heart rate increases, our breaths are shorter and more shallow. And when we're in a stress response, the body is designed to suppress all of the other systems in the body because all it's worried about is survival. Short-term acute threat is what this system is designed for. And so the immune system is suppressed, the digestive system is suppressed, the reproductive system is suppressed, as is the respiratory and cardiovascular system. They're kind of shut down briefly because we don't need them to be working optimally. We need to focus all of our attention on the danger. And that's fine in short-term, acute, real threat situations. But if that's the way we're living our life all the time, then those systems in the body are never really online the way they're supposed to be. And so we can have a lot of digestive distress. We can have autoimmune conditions. We can have chronic health conditions. And that's all a nervous system response in the body, or it has to do with the nervous system in the body, because automatically those systems are suppressed. So we can do all the diet and all the exercise and take all the medication we want, but we're not really going to be able to treat and heal those conditions if the nervous system is never out of that fight or flight response. And our executive functioning is limited. And so all the good choices we want to make and patterns we want to change in our life, we're just trying to force it with willpower instead of allowing it to really just become something that's part of what feels at peace in our body to do. All right, so when we think about our 8-week group, our yoga therapy group, here's the themes we talk about each week. And each week there's a little bit of a lesson. There's usually some sort of self-discovery, self-assessment quiz type thing that we do and look at. And then we do different practices that apply to the specific theme for the week, but also they build on each other as we go through the 8 weeks. So you end up with this toolbox full of resources by the end of the 2 months. So the first week we talk about defining anxiety. We introduce a stress continuum. We kind of see where we are on that spectrum, knowing that sometimes we're in what feels like a little bit more of a crisis stage, and then sometimes we feel like we're kind of okay, and that's always going to be fluctuating, and recognizing what to do when that happens and what our resources are. Anxiety is often the result of unresolved trauma in the body that's stored in the body somehow. And this trauma may or may not be something that we're even aware of. It may be something that we think we are past. And logically, we might have moved past whatever these traumas are. And again, we may not even recognize a life experience as being traumatic because it's our normal situation. But the body has a memory of things. The body remembers fear from the past. And anything that seems similar to that in the present is going to trigger that response in the body that something must be wrong. And it's completely involuntary and it's really out of our control unless we start to become aware of it and pay attention. So we learn about this relationship between unresolved trauma in the body, and we do some assessments, and we don't have to get into the details of what anyone's trauma might be. In fact, that's not really what we do in a yoga therapy group. That's a perfect thing to do with your therapist if you aren't already. But what we do is just recognize that something happened, and then we start to go from there. So we do some physical practices to release anxiety in the body and to regulate the nervous system the next week. We talk about attachment theory, which, if you're not familiar, it has to do with the way we were attached to our primary caregivers in most cases, but it can also have to do with significant relationships in adulthood too, and how secure we feel in different relationships and what our response to that is. And so it's really interesting to have this assessment, to do this assessment and to see where we lie. And this is usually kind of an aha moment kind of week, because people are like, oh, that explains why I act this way in these situations. And so that's a self-discovery tool that we use, and again, decide how to go from there. We also learn how to reparent our inner child, which sounds a little woo-woo, but it is, but it's amazing too. And what we recognize is that while in the past, sometime in our life, either in childhood or early adulthood or later adulthood, there's something that we weren't getting that we needed. And we can't go back in the past and make somebody give us something that they didn't give us. But we can, through meditation and through journaling and just lots and lots of self-compassion, we can go back and nurture and support and take care of that part of ourselves, and recognizing that we are always the one that is always going to be there to comfort and take care of ourselves. And so we can go back to, let's say, 7 years old when we didn't get something that we needed. And if we can offer love and compassion to that 7-year-old, instead of that 7-year-old yelling at us in the form of what shows up as anxiety, we can comfort that 7-year-old and then no longer feel that sense of alarm in those situations. So I know it sounds kind of weird right now, but it makes sense as we get into it in the 8 weeks. But that's what we do with attachment theory. We talk about the brain on week 5, and we talk about balancing the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Most of us know that the left side of the brain is kind of the more linear, logical side, and the right side is the more creative, artistic, musical side. And in terms of anxiety, it shows up different ways depending on which side of the brain is a little bit more active. And so we really want to integrate and balance the two sides so that in any given moment, in any situation, we know if this is a linear logical kind of problem or if it needs a creative solution. And our brain can very easily switch back and forth between which one of those is the best way to respond, instead of getting stuck all in our emotions or getting stuck all in real black and white thinking. So we do some practices to integrate the two sides of the body. We look at things like perfectionism and people pleasing and codependent tendencies and how those contribute to anxiety, how those are results of patterns and relationships in our past, most likely, and how we move forward to learn how to change those patterns. We talk about overthinking and ruminating and reframing negative thoughts. And this is a practice that can be done and maybe something that's familiar, but with the reminder that these things are going to sink in and take root better. These concepts are going to take root better when we're coming from a calm, regulated nervous system. So we incorporate theme or an idea that may be familiar, but even if we think about something like CBT, that's going to work better if we're coming from the calm, regulated, rest and digest nervous system response. So we kind of put these two things together. And then we look at uncertainty and recognize that everything in life is uncertain. And how can we learn to actually embrace that uncertainty and know that the peace actually comes from not knowing all the answers and not having to know the answers and not feeling like we need that in order to feel safe, recognizing that uncertain doesn't have to mean unsafe. And we offer throughout the entire course lots and lots of self-compassion, because that's how we're able to really heal from this, is to offer ourselves compassion for where we've been, compassion for other people and their experiences, and how to move forward, knowing that sometimes we're just going to have to know that these experiences are we're always gonna have hard experiences in life. Life is equally amazing and equally terrible sometimes, and nothing's gone wrong when bad things happen, but how can we maintain a sense of peace and knowing that everything ultimately is going to be okay? And so that's kind of the outline of what we go through in the group. And some of the tools and practices that we use each week are breath work. That is our primary way to regulate the nervous system. We do different meditations and yoga nidra practices that are similar to a guided meditation. We use the body, we use movement, we do some journaling, we introduce emotional freedom technique or tapping. We have an affirmation that follows us through the group. We use self-discovery tools, as I said. There's home practices, and there's an online classroom that goes with this course. So if you ever have to miss a week, you'll still have access to everything that we covered. You'll use it for your homework. You'll have access to it even after the 8 weeks are over. So you'll have access to it indefinitely. I'm going to just give you a brief demo of what that looks like if this works. So this is what it looks like. So you'll get a login and password for this. And there's some yoga classes here that you can do that are just movement practices that I've recorded. This is the week 1 lesson. We click on it. You'll see that there's a little slide presentation. If you press play, you'll get my voiceover of what that lesson was. We watch a YouTube video in that group, so that's here. There's a recording of this meditation that we're actually going to do today. So you'll have access to all the tools and practices that we do. So you can use them for homework, or again, if you can't remember what we talked about, or if you have to miss a week, session 2, all the practices are here in the lessons and on through the 8 weeks. So that's something that you'll just have in addition to the live classes. You'll have online access to that going forward as well. And please reach back out to me if you have any other questions about anything, and hopefully I'll see all of y'all again soon somewhere.